You have to lead. You have to lead yourself. You have to lead your transition. You have to be an active participant and not just a manager, not just manage it, but actually lead it, lead yourself, lead your family to that success. And there's a great quote in the book here that I'll read. Yes, I'm going to read to you. It's like reading Rainbow. And it's the difference between management and leadership, which management is important, but leadership is where that's where things happen. That's where you get to stuff to go. So, and in the book, it says, management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. Management is efficiency and climbing the ladder of success. And leadership determines whether the ladder is leaning against the right wall. Super powerful. Welcome to the Leading with Vulnerability podcast. You guys all know me, Yuma Barnett. Today's episode, we're going to talk about transition and transition in all aspects, right? I just transitioned from the military after 20 plus years, but what I'm going to say today will transcend just a military transition. There will be some focus on my military transition and what I think people can do or some tools they can use to have a successful transition from the military. But what I'm going to say will have application in any phase of your life when there's a transition, because as we know, we're kind of in a constant state of transition in our lives. And I think when you go back and you look at anything in transition, sometimes you just have to go back to the root and what is the definition of transition. So by definition, a transition is the process or a period of changing from one state or condition to another. So by that definition, we will find ourselves in a lot of transitions throughout the course of our lives, whether we're transitioning from middle school to high school, from being single to married, from no kids to having kids, or in my case, from having one kid to having 4 children, from one job or career to another job or career. And, most recently in my life is my transition from uniform in the Army to back to being a civilian after, 20 years of doing that. So transition is just a natural part of life. It's just the way, how do we approach those transitions to make sure they're the most successful for us, right? To me, you have to be intentional and deliberate about those transitions in your life. Sometimes when we're thinking about transitions, we're only intentional and deliberate about the big transitions, if you will, the big ones, the single to married, the transition from uniform to civilian after 4 years or 24 years. We don't necessarily focus and put the attention that we should on some of those smaller transition or those micro transitions. Like I had many while I was in the service where I would transition from one Army base to another Army base. And though we looked at them and we were intentional about the transitions, I don't think I was as intentional and deliberate as I could have been in those smaller transitions. Even my transitions in leadership positions throughout the Army, when I transitioned from a team leader to a squad leader, it's a transition that's, already within something that you're doing. And I could have been more deliberate about those transitions and use some of the tools I'm going to say here to make those transitions smoother and have more purpose and meaning. And I think if we start to do that in all the transition in our life, use some of these tools and some of this stuff. I wish I knew some of the stuff I'm about to share years ago. It's only going to set us up and make us more successful when we do come to those bigger transitions in life. And it seems like the older you get, the more significant some of those transitions become. So I know I'm guilty of having less focus on some of what I deemed less important transitions. And I just wish I had focused on them a little bit more and cultivated some of these tools and some of the stuff I'm going to share. And it would have helped me in my military transition. Like most things in life, especially as you get older, hindsight is 2020. And I hope to share some of the lessons learned from my past transitions and things I learned about transition to help you have a better transition, whether it's from the military or from any of those number of other things that I mentioned. Like I said, I'll focus primarily on my military transition, but what I'm going to share will transcend the military, and you can use it personally. You can use it with your kids. You can use some of this stuff. You can pass this advice along to friends or coworkers that are in a transition. And I truly believe it will help people have a more successful transition. So the first thing I'll say when you get into transition of any kind, and specifically a military transition, especially for somebody like me who did 20 years in it, it becomes such a part of your life that's what you identify as. And you can kind of lose sight of your base self, or the person you were before you joined the military or before you took the career, and you identify as this other person or with this other career, and it's not really identifying with your core self. So any transition starts with the understanding of self, a true, deep understanding of who you are, especially if you're transitioning in from one career field to another career field. If you don't have a deep understanding of who you are and what you want in life and what makes you happy, you can find yourself, and I know we've all seen it, we can see people transition from one career field and they'll find themselves in a very similar career field on the other side, when in reality they were actually unhappy with the career field or the situation they were in before the transition. And because they didn't have a deep understanding of themselves, they didn't navigate properly through that transition to the next phase, and they were still unhappy or didn't maximize the joy they could find in work and in life. And it all starts with you. If you don't have a deep understanding of yourself and who you are and your goals and your objectives and your family goals and objectives and priorities, you're going to be starting at a deficit. And what I say is it's like navigation, land navigation. If you're in the military, you do land navigation all the time to find land navigation, to check your navigation knowledge, because that's a basic task you have to have in the military. It's no different if you're a civilian and you're going to, I'm driving from Columbus to somewhere in Atlanta I've never been. I have to know where I'm starting, right? So I can know where I'm going. You have to know where you are on the map, so you can navigate past that rough terrain or those rough patches en route or in transition to that next phase. So it's no different in a transition as it is with map reading or navigation. You have to know where you start, and where you start in a transition is understanding of yourself. By understanding yourself, where you are, you'll be able to navigate more clearly to the next point. And that starts with cultivating your emotional intelligence, right? And that's a word that has been said a lot on this show. All the smart people I've had on here that are much smarter than me talk about cultivating their emotional intelligence and the importance of emotional intelligence. But again, I like to get back to the base of a lot of things. So when I looked at a word like transition, I pulled out the dictionary to look it up. Emotional intelligence, I've done this before. I'll pull it out and I'll read what's that definition of emotional intelligence and what does it really mean? What do I need to cultivate? How do I need to cultivate it? How do I need to go about it? And if you sometimes have to stop and just root yourself in the basics. And the basics are, in a lot of cases, you open up the manual or you open up the dictionary and you understand at the base level what something is. So I shared what the meaning of transition is, and I'll also share what emotional intelligence is: the ability to understand, use, and manage your own emotions in positive ways to relieve stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others, and overcome challenges and diffuse conflict. So within that definition, there are multiple words that are inherent in a transition, right? Communication, challenges, conflict, understanding, management of emotions. All of those things are something you will find during a transition. And by cultivating your own emotional intelligence, you will understand what your challenges are, what causes stress, how to diffuse that stress, how to communicate effectively. It'll open up dialogues between you and your spouse, or between you and the guidance counselor of the university that you're applying for during your transition. Or if you're coming out of school, it'll raise questions for that new employer that you go into. So can't beat the dead horse enough. Transition and really all things in life kind of start with you, a deep understanding of who you are, asking yourself those challenging questions, and understanding your emotional intelligence so that you can communicate effectively, overcome those challenges, that rough terrain, and diffuse the conflict or those friction points as you're moving along in your transition. That involves two things, right? Two things that are education and learning. And when you start with education and learning, you can never stop if you want to be truly successful. You have to commit to lifelong education and learning. Now, if you're in the military, when you talk education, a lot of people their mind will immediately go to, I got to get my college degree. I didn't join the Army to go to college. That's not what education and learning is, right? That's a type of education. Education is broad, right? Education is beyond the classroom. Education is reading books on the next career field that you're interested in, or listening to podcasts, or watching YouTube videos. Learning and education go, hand in hand with when you're reading those books and watching those videos, or taking or enrolling in a college course. Ultimately, that education and learning is giving you that better understanding of self, which is the baseline to a good successful transition. Now, there are thousands of books, podcasts, videos that you can watch to continue education, right? To continue that journey of lifelong learning. And the book I'm going to use today and reference today is something that I found when I was in college just a couple of years ago. It was a mandatory, it was part of the curriculum to read this book. It's a book that I wish I had read years sooner, because not only did it help me during my military transition, this book and its simple knowledge that's in there, the simple concepts that are in there, can help you in every aspect of your life. And you've heard me talk about it on this podcast before, but it's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. If you are near or in a transition in your life, whether it's a military transition, you're getting a divorce, you're getting married, you're having a kid, I highly recommend this book, and so do over 25 million other people. It's an easy read, and it's just got some really practical stuff in there that can help you navigate a transition, right? And if you're in the military, even more so, because what is said, the concepts in this book translate to a lot of the doctrine and the things you learned when you're in the military. It just puts it into civilian speak. And if you're like me, you'll have a lot of light bulb moments when you're reading this book and seeing the principles of those 7 habits and applying them to your transition. And like I said, when I say transition, you can apply them to your transition from platoon sergeant to first sergeant, from single, crazy, wild, Army guy, infantry soldier, ranger, raging it downtown, to now you're married, you have more responsibility, you're having kids, you have a family. You can use these 7 habits in all things. If you're applying for a college, you're applying to go to school, use these 7 habits to help you plan and make sure you have the most success in that endeavor, whatever it may be. And that brings you to, that word, success. What is success, right? I think we all have to define what success means to us, right? And we have to be deliberate and honest with ourselves to define what success is. So for me, success is finding joy in all aspects of my life and work. just because you transition out of the military or you transition from one career to the next and you're making more money and you're making more money, you're working every day, you're doing things that you didn't expect you could do or would ever do, it doesn't necessarily mean you're happy, right? It doesn't necessarily mean you are successful in your own definition. Are you doing what you want to do, or are you doing what you feel like you have to do to survive? Which is, a valid point. If you might have to suck it up for a while and do something you do not enjoy. But if you haven't defined what success looks like to you, you're more apt to wallow in that unhappy situation or bounce from career to career, job to job, or spouse to spouse. If you don't define your success, I think, speaking personally, and people that listen, we all know somebody who did 20 years in the military. They drove off the base on Friday afternoon. They put on civilian clothes, drove right back in on Monday morning, walked back into the same building, into a very similar job, and they hate it. They're not happy. They tell you how unhappy they are. They tell you things like, you should have never got out of the military. Don't ever get out. I don't like what I'm doing. And I say they didn't define their success. Their success, they thought they defined it by getting out, getting a job, and grinding away again for another 20 years, which might be the definition of success for some. But success for me is joy in all aspects, work and life. And it's not instantaneous. It's about the journey, not necessarily the destination. It might take you a little while to get to that definition of success, but make sure you're defining what it is and you are leading your way into the next phase of your life. Don't just manage your life. Manage, I hate the word manage. When I think of manage, I'm a sports fan. I watch a lot of sports. When the sports commentators are talking about the quarterback who's the game manager, that's not the MVP, right? He's not the one walking away with Super Bowl MVPs, most likely. Things do happen, but when there's somebody just managing, you're just doing enough to where you don't mess up. And it's the same for life. If you're just managing your life and doing just enough, to stay happy 60% of the time, you're doing yourself and your family a disservice. You have to lead. You have to lead yourself. You have to lead your transition. You have to be an active participant and not just a manager, not just manage it, but actually lead it, lead yourself, lead your family to that success. And there's a great quote in the book here that I'll read. Yes, I'm going to read to you. It's like reading Rainbow. And it's the difference between management and leadership, which management is important, but leadership is where that's where things happen. That's where you get to stuff to go. So, and in the book, it says, management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. Management is efficiency in climbing the ladder of success, and leadership determines whether the ladder is leaning against the right wall. Super powerful. Anytime I'm in a tough spot or unsure, I read that quote and I step back, I gain some perspective, and I say, is my ladder on the right wall? Just because I'm climbing up to a roof and doing the job, am I even on the right roof? Am I where I want to be? Am I placing my ladder right? So you owe it to yourself. You owe it to the people around you to lead yourself to the most successful, most happy life that you can. But it's going to take work, right? It's going to take work, and we're going to get into that a little bit. So speaking about the 7 habits, what are the 7 habits? I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to read this whole book to you, but I'll break down the 7 habits and a little bit of what they mean to me and how they've helped me. So your first habit is be proactive. Number 2 is begin with the end in mind. Number 3, put first things first. 4 is think win-win. 5, seek to understand and then be understood. 6 is synergize. And 7 is sharpen the saw. Now, just because I'm giving you the 7 habits here doesn't mean you shouldn't go out and get the book, because they explain it much better than I can. But I'll tell you, number 1, be proactive. That's where that leading your transition is. The proactive people, they're the ones that are the most successful. They're proactive. And even in being proactive, sometimes you might fail in what you're doing. That's why businesses go bankrupt. And that's why guys like Elon Musk took them years to be successful and find, how to the ones and zeros line up to make batteries last as long as they do. But you got to be proactive. You got to be out front, be proactive with yourself and be proactive with your family and really lead that transition. Number 2, and I'm going to speak on it a little bit more detail in a minute, but beginning with the end in mind is probably my favorite. It is my favorite of all these 7 steps. Is what's that end goal and how do I backwards plan from that goal, right? And I'm going to break that one down just a little bit more here in a second. Put first things first. Sounds simple enough, right? But what are those first things? What are those priorities? How are you prioritizing? For me, it was my family. I transitioned out of service to spend more time with my family. Those were my first things. I needed to put them first, right? And then apply these principles to it. Think win-win. Number 4, that's nothing more than mindset. Not having a lose-lose attitude, not having a win-lose, I win, you lose, or lose-win, you lose, I lose, you win. You got to have a win-win attitude. I can't, marriage is probably the best way to describe this. If you're transitioning at any point in your life and you're married, you need to have a win-win attitude. And what I mean by that is if you're transitioning out, I'll use myself as an example. I met my wife here in Georgia, in Savannah. She's a Georgia girl. If I was transitioning out and I said, hey, we're moving back to New Mexico, we're going to be closer to my mom, as much as my mom would love that. That might not be what she wants. She might want to stay in the South, or closer to her family. So she's got to be part of it. We have to have a win-win come out of it. So we have, the best marriage without friction as possible. So there's got to be give and take on both sides, and you got to be able to try your best to come to a winning solution for both parties, all parties in it. 5, seek first to understand and then be understood. Again, marriage, great example. I know I found myself doing it before, but where you say, but you didn't hear what I said. You didn't see what I told you about moving to New Mexico and the pros of it. When in turn, I never sought to understand why she didn't want to move to New Mexico. And so by seeking to understand first, you're setting a groundwork there to reach that win-win. Number 6, synergize. That's just, synergizing all of these tools and all of these things together. And then your last one is the sharpen the saw, which is constant improvement, right? Sharpen the saw is that lifelong learning, that pursuit of lifelong learning. Sharpening the saw is never being satisfied. It's always seeking to improve, always improving that foxhole. No matter where you're at in life, how there's always something that you could do a little bit better for yourself in a lot of cases, for your family, for your work. So always improving, always sharpening that saw, and always trying to be better. Now, these 7 habits, pretty simple to read, right? Once you get into it and trying to understand them can be a little bit more difficult, but you can apply these 7 habits to anything, right? If you're transitioning out of the military and you want to go to Emory University, apply the habits to that problem or that decision, right? Being proactive. Beginning, why are you going there? What's the end goal? In mind. Win-win. Seeking to understand. Not. You can apply these in anything, not just a transition. In any phase of your life, you can apply these 7 habits to being a parent, to being a husband, employee, apply these 7 habits in detail. They don't have to just be in transition, even though that's what we're talking about now. And when I read those, I said that number 2, beginning with the end in mind, is my favorite of all the habits. And I think it's just because I spent so much time in the military, and you do, backwards planning, right? If you have a time on the objective at 2 a.m, that's when you have to be on target at 2 a.m. You get a whiteboard, you write up 2 a.m. time on target, and then you backwards plan everything that has to happen to get you there by 2 a.m. Do the same thing in life. If you're moving to St. Louis, Missouri, when you transition out of service, or when you transition from one career to another career, literally write it down on some paper or whiteboard. St. Louis, Missouri, I got to be there March 15th at this time to start this job or start school, and backwards plan. And in that plan, you will start to highlight areas and points of friction in that rough terrain that you're going to have to navigate, and start applying those 7 habits to each one of those individually, and mitigating that risk down, or mitigating that friction point down, so you can have a more successful transition into that next phase. Begin with the end in mind. It's easy to understand. It's easy to do. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to begin with the end in mind in all things you're doing. If it's relationships, if it's networking, why are you networking with this specific person, right? Why are you doing it? What is the end goal of why you're doing X? There's an exercise that I do when I speak to some of the transitioning rangers, and we begin with the end in mind, the ultimate end in mind. So at some point, I challenge you to do the same, is take 10 minutes and write out what your ideal day looks like when you're 65 years old. And hopefully when you're 65, that's when you're done working, you got your feet up. The only thing you have to worry about is when you're going to go put a line in the water, or when you're going to go sit in the deer stand, or when you're going to go watch their grandkids, the baseball game. So that's the ultimate end, right? And I tell them, take some time and write it out. What does that day look like? And I challenge you to do it and be detailed about what you're doing. Start from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, and what does that day look like? What day is it? And I'm going to share my write-up real quick and show you kind of an example of what it is. So for me, my ultimate day, I wake up at 7 a.m. I go out into the kitchen, get a cup of coffee from Kate, who is generous enough to make me a cup of coffee. I go outside on my back deck and take in the crisp fall air. So I even went as far as, it's fall time, which is my favorite time of season down here in the South. It's Thanksgiving Day. And the house will soon be busy with kids and grandkids. In the hours to come, we will cook turkey. We'll throw footballs around. We'll watch football. We'll watch the Cowboys lose. I'll stand there with my sons and my daughters, and we'll remember the good times that we had in that swimming pool over there, or in that deer stand that's in the back. I'll give Jackson a hard time for the deer the big 10-point that he missed that got away. Kate will be in the house with all these grandkids. That's what I see her baking and making the turkeys and the pies. And laughter will be everywhere, loud and joyful. We'll enjoy our food, and with full hearts, full bellies, we'll all go to bed. And before we go to bed, Kate and I will look at each other, which we do now, and we just reflect on how blessed we really are. Now, when you look at that, or you read that, I had a coach that I got from one of the transition foundations, which I'll talk about in a second, had me do that exercise, had me write that up. And I didn't really know what to do. So I just started writing, and that's what came out. And then what I realized when I was done and I read it, there's nothing in that write-up that talks about how much money I made, how many jobs I worked, what kind of degrees I ended up getting. it was all about my family and being with my family. And that writing that up really centered me around my transition, that my family was the key element to my transition. That's what it wasn't the next career. It wasn't the master's degree that I might go and pursue. It was making sure I'm there with laughter and joy with my family, right? And it was a big moment for me, because that was part of my cultivating of emotional intelligence. My understanding of self was writing up that ideal day from when I'm 65 years old. So I challenge all of you to go out there and do that as well, and see what comes out of it, because it might help you come up with some priorities and stuff for the transition, and where you want to go and where you want to be when you're 65 years old. So now that you've kind of started the pursuit of understanding yourself and where you want to be and who you are, what I'll say specifically to military transition, and I think really any transition, is you want to start as early as you can in preparing. And like I said, in the military, you have a contract, you have writing on the wall when you're getting out, and you want to start that transition process no less than 24 months out. And really what I tell people and newer Rangers and soldiers when they come in is, as soon as you get to that first duty station, you need to start thinking about transition. You need to start thinking about the education you want to get. Start thinking about what you want to do. Do you want to stay in? Do you want to get out? But you really got to focus and narrow in on it starting at 24 months out, because it is a process, and there's a lot of things that you have to do in a military transition. And it's no different in a civilian transition. You might not get 24 months, but if you're a bank manager for a bank in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and now they want to make you a full branch manager at this other location in St. Louis, Missouri, and they want you there in 12 months. Don't wait till 6 months out to start applying those 7 habits. Start the minute you get home, start applying them and finding those friction points and being able to set yourself up for success for that transition. So it transcends just the military transition. Again, military transition specific, do your transition assistance program that's mandatory through the military as soon as you can. That thing's kind of like you never know what you're going to get in that. It's very instructor dependent. It's very post dependent, but it's not great. It's just not a great product you get from it. There's a lot of reasons for it. You got underpaid, unhappy, probably government employees working there, or contract employees. I had a few that were really good and gave a lot of great advice, and I had some that you knew they were just there to check the block and move on. And it's literally, you have to get that transition assistance program box checked before you go. And when you go into that mandatory TAP or transition program, go in there with the right attitude, use those 7 habits, begin with the end in mind. What do you want to get out of this? And make the most of it. But if you're transitioning from service, take advantage of the benevolent nonprofit organizations that are out there to help you transition. I am not as well versed on some of the stuff that is out there for the conventional forces, but there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of stuff in the special operations community. You have the Honor Foundations, the Special Operations Transition Foundation, a more elite transition program, which is a new one stood up by Tony Main and his crew here in Columbus. The Commit Foundation, DoD Skill Bridge, which is available to everybody. Go get that 6-month internship on your way out the door to hopefully walk into a career that you want. 50 Strong, you can look them up on LinkedIn. A great organization that helps connect you with employers. And there's many more out there. I just don't know of all of them. But I participated in the Honor Foundation. I participated in the Commit Foundation. I've done some stuff with the Special Operations Transition Foundation. I know Tony Main and his crew. Use them. Use them. Use all of them. They're all a little bit different. They all offer a little bit different stuff, but what they really offer you is different perspectives, which is a huge thing in transition, is having those different perspectives so you can find that life, and that life that leads to what your definition of success is. And another thing these do is they start setting you up with the right language, and the right mentorship and the right networks that are going to help you in that transition. So use those programs. If you have questions about them, message me, call me. I'm a T Honor Foundation alumni. I can write your letter of recommendation after I speak with you and see what your goals are. But all those programs, and they're really centered around getting to know yourself, cultivating your why, and helping you transition into a life of meaning and purpose is the goal for all of them. So use those programs. Don't just rely on that mandatory TAP program. And they're deeper than jobs. It's going to school, getting the right connections in the universities that you want to apply to. They have all of that stuff in these programs, so use them. All right. So when you're doing that, when you're using these programs, they're going to help you translate your military skills into civilian terms. So you can take your evaluations and your job descriptions and translate that stuff into relative and relevant civilian language. What I'll say is don't oversell your ability and don't undersell your ability either. That's where it comes in important, having those mentorships and these programs. They'll be able to tell you what you think is not important or something you did overseas or when you were in the operations center or something you did in school. They'll be able to say, if you think it's not important, but they might see and say, no, that's super important. That's what industry is looking for right now, is somebody with that relevant experience or that has led in this type of environment. So they'll help you start translating those terms. But you got to translate those terms because people don't know what a platoon sergeant is or a first sergeant is. And, only 1% of the population serve in the military. And they're not going to take the time to learn what all those different codes and mission, those occupational specialties, what they mean. So you've got to do the work for them. And the earlier you start, the better you'll be. So once you're understanding yourself, you're translating your skills, you're going through some of these programs that help you do that. The next phase is networking. And the key word in networking is working. It takes work to build your professional network. I was part of a social media post the other day where it asked about networking, and somebody on there said, networking is one of those foo-foo things that doesn't really work. Networking is, it's not what they say it is. I couldn't disagree more. If you don't think networking works in getting you into the education path you want or the career path you want, you're not networking correctly. Networking is a very effective tool for transition. You have to do it right. You can't set unreal expectations. You can't go in there in a network call with somebody who you call a former service member who you served with and you're say, hey, can you get me a job? That's not networking. Networking is not connecting with as many random people as you can on LinkedIn. Networking is not, like I said, asking your old Army or your Ranger buddies what they're doing, because they're those unhappy ones that are working back on post. Networking is about getting comfortable, being uncomfortable. Networking is about asking people in a career field that you might want to go to have a conversation with you, not asking for a job. It's part of that understanding of self and making sure that you are chasing the career that you want to go into. It's not about getting the job. It might lead to a job in the long run, but that should never be the goal of networking. Networking should be about building relationships and personal and self-development and getting outside your comfort zone. I had a networking call with the former head of Michael Dell's, like Dell Computers, HR lead. I spoke to her for over an hour. What she shed on how HR works and what HR does was mind-blowing. It was very eye-opening. I didn't go in there asking her for a job. I went in there to learn from her. And that's what networking is. It's part of that equation for lifelong lifelong learning. It's about building relationships. And through those relationships, it might lead to a profession or a career later, but it's never the goal of networking. And networking is challenging, right? People are busy. Be prepared to connect and try to network with 10 people and you get 2 replies. And that's okay. That's fine. Make the most out of those 2 replies. Use those 7 habits before you go into that networking call. Begin with the end in mind. Why are you talking to this person? What do you hope to learn out of it? Not necessarily what do you hope to get out of it. Seek to understand and then be understood. And networking is much about learning what you do not want to do, as it is learning what you want to do or finding the job. If you talk to the right people and you talk to enough of the right people, you might realize that you don't want to go and chase your MBA or your finance, go in a finance route and have to work 110 hours a week for your first 5 years while you are cutting your teeth in the finance sector. You might learn that sales, even though you thought it was terrible, is the career path that you want to go on. So networking done right is super important, but you have to do it right. And just use those 7 habits when you're in their networking. And a great way to network, it's a whole nother topic, but if you're on LinkedIn, use that LinkedIn search bar. And if you want to go into technology sales, type in there technology, tech sales, and veteran. And it'll populate with all kinds of people who are veterans in the tech sales area. Go in there, check out their profiles, and send them a message and say, hey, do you have 5 minutes for a phone call? I would like to learn more about what you do in your field. You increase your odds because this person is a former veteran, so they've been in your shoes at some point. They know that transition is hard, and they're more likely to link in with you and talk to you. And once you get in the foot in the door, that's when you say, hey, can you connect me with 1 or 2 other people in this field? And then that's when you broaden beyond the veteran field. But it's a great way to initially break in is LinkedIn. And LinkedIn's a whole nother conversation. But there are ways out there in this digital age to find people to talk to and build out your professional network and just use those 7 habits. Networking, a lot of people will tell you, your network is your net worth, and network. Yes, network, but networking is just a tool in the transition process. It is not the be all end all of the transition process. Just like a engine mechanic has his 5/16 socket, which is a primary tool that he uses almost every day, he's still got a whole toolbox full of other tools that he uses. And networking is just like that 5/16 socket. It's a tool that you could probably use every day and refer to somebody and get some advice, but it is what it is. It is a tool, and it's not applicable in every situation. So use networking, start your networking. Networking is a great way to learn how to tell your story to people. And it's, I approach every networking call I have as a mini job interview, right? And I try to present the best version of myself as I can, because it's not necessarily the person I'm networking with. It's the person that they know that they connect me with in second and third order effects. So use networking. It's a tool. It's a great tool, but don't rely on it solely. And then the next thing in your transition is, understanding how to tell your story, right? This is something that is happening concurrently while you're cultivating that emotional intelligence, while you're building your network and you're having those network phone calls and asking those questions, while you're continuing that lifelong education and learning. You're learning how to tell your story. Being able to understand and tell your story, especially of service, if you're a service member, because so people understand truly what an 11 Bravo First Sergeant does, is essential. You can't just tell the story in ones and zeros and say, I manage 120 people in a company. You need to be able to tell the story about it. And that's what some of these nonprofits do. They help you build that story and help you be able to tell that story. But that's what job interviewing is. It's storytelling. You need to be able to tell the story for the question that is asked. So start working on your personal story, just how you introduce yourself. When somebody says, "Hey, tell me a little bit about yourself," it shouldn't be so rigid, and it should be, well rehearsed, but come off as genuine and natural, and literally be a story. And there's a whole nother podcast episode on storytelling and the importance of storytelling. But if you do these things, you do these steps, you use some of these organizations, they're going to get you'll start to understand the power of telling stories. These are all just starting points for success. We've been going for 45 minutes here, and I could talk for hours on transition from service and transition in life and transition from single to married. But like I said, these are all just tools at your disposal, and these are the primary things that I've used and focus on to help out with my transition. And there are a couple other things, again, are kind of deeper, but your resume, again, doesn't matter if you're military or a civilian. Use a professional resume writer. Sure, send them all your evaluations and all the good stuff you've done and have them write it out. That's a very good way to see how all of that stuff translates into civilian terms. But you need to own your resume, right? Just because they write it doesn't mean you hand it in and then they start asking you questions about it. You better be able to answer those questions in the same civilian terms that are written on that resume. So I used a professional resume writer, but my resume is a living, breathing document. It's going to change with every job description, everything that you do. And you need to understand your resume in detail to why you put the and why, where you put that. Why is there a period right there? That might sound a little bit extreme, but that's part of understanding yourself and knowing who you are. And if you are giving somebody a snapshot of yourself, you better be an active participant in that, not just take what that professional resume writer gave you and then in turn just hand it back over without really deep diving and understanding it at a level where you can tell the story about it. So a lot of stuff in there with resumes. It's important. I just can't emphasize enough how important it is for you to own your resume and understand it, because it's going to change a lot. And you're not going to have access to a professional resume writer when you apply for a job and the resume they give you doesn't really work with that job. You need to be able to translate that stuff and understand it. So take the time with your resume. Make sure if you're making a transition, especially from the military, that's of your choosing, make sure it's the right move, right? So I don't know how many people I saw over my years in the service that I would run back into who had transitioned out. We're doing great on the outside, but probably 75% of them would say, I wish I had stayed in, right? Because I don't think sometimes people don't realize how good they have it in a certain job or career until it's gone. So take the time. I say it all the time. Don't run to the exit door and run out in the hallway. Walk to the exit door, open the door, look out in the hallway, and just make sure you're making the right decision for yourself and your family, if you have one. Take some time for yourself as well. Sometimes we get to moving so fast, especially if we have family, that we don't stop and really, again, cultivate ourselves and look at ourselves and ask ourselves the tough questions. So make sure you do that. Reflect a little bit and take some time with yourself and either journal or write some stuff down or do whatever it is that you can do to recenter on yourself while you're in the transition, after you transition, and then for the rest of your life. And the last things I'll say for the transition specifically is don't be afraid to ask for help along the way. Reach out. I'm willing to talk to you. Your former, leaders are willing to talk to you. These benevolent organizations, if you use them, go back to them and see if you can talk to them again if you run into trouble. And you just got to be, Leading with Vulnerability podcast, you got to be get comfortable being uncomfortable and being vulnerable and asking for help when you need it. and admitting if things didn't go right. And then just don't be satisfied with being unhappy or not meeting that definition of success that you had. And, like I said, these are just a few of the things that I used to help me get through my transition, which is still ongoing. And I'll share in closing a little bit of personal about my transition story. So when you transition from the military after 20 years or after 4 years, when you run into people, the first thing they're going to ask you in a lot of cases, what are you doing? What are you going to do? You got a job? You going to school? And it can get overwhelming and cause a little bit of anxiety. And what I had to do was what I just recommended all of you do, is take some time for self and self-reflect. I had to slow down. People ask me, are you going to go up and get your MBA? Are you going to go work over here? Are you going to apply for this position here? Have you been looking at the GS positions here? And I just had to stop. I deployed 16 times over my 21 years. I was gone a lot, and I had to refocus on what that definition of success, on what that day looks like when I'm 65. And it was about family. So I had to stop and pull back a little bit and reanalyze what I want to do. And that's where I came up with, and I'm doing the Barnett Multimedia, where I'm doing the family photos and the wedding photography and the wedding videography and do social media marketing and all that stuff. I don't know if that's going to be successful or not, but you've got one shot in this life. Life's too short, too precious to spend it with regret, to not take a chance on yourself. If you practice those 7 habits and you put systems and processes in place, and you want to go start your own business or do your own thing, or you want to go for this education or this degree, put the stuff in place, have the conversations with your loved ones, and do it. Just don't be satisfied with mediocre, or don't do something that's going to make you unhappy just because you think that's what you have to do. Right. I'm going to try this media stuff and see if it works. And the one thing I will know, whether it's successful or not, I won't have to look back and say, when I'm 65 and say, I wish I had tried. I wish I did. I'll say I tried and failed, but I'm glad I tried, right? It's better to try and fail than to never try at all, cliche as it may be. So I hope this helps somebody in their transition process. I've learned a lot of things that I can't even put into this, 50 minutes. If you have a question for me, contact me. I have a network of people out there to where if you are looking at a certain career or a certain university, give me a call and we'll see who I know to make you successful. But anybody that's watching this or listening to this, all I want you to be is meet your definition of success and happiness and joy in all aspects of your life. So hope you got something. Appreciate all you guys out there who listen, subscribe, share this podcast. The text feedback that I get from people, how it's helped them in their life is extremely, it's awesome. There's no other way to put it. It's awesome. I like seeing people be happy and successful and do the things that they want to do to make themselves happy. So reach out to me if you have anything. Now here comes the mandatory part, right? Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and if you feel so inclined, join the Patreon. Give $10 a month to the podcast. I'll send you some swag every year that you're a patron, and we'll keep producing quality content like this. But until next time, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.